Welcome to this daily PBJ devotional. Read Deuteronomy 26 and Isaiah 53 today to keep going in the Old Testament reading schedule. This devotional is about Deuteronomy 26. When you enter the land that the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, and you take possession of it and settle in it, you are to take some of the first fruits of all your produce from the soil of the land that the Lord your God is giving you and put them in a basket. Then go to the place the Lord your God will choose as a dwelling for his name, to the priest who is serving at that time, and say to him, I declare today to the Lord your God that I have entered the land that the Lord swore to our fathers to give us. Then the priest shall take the basket from your hands and place it before the altar of the Lord your God. And you are to declare before the Lord your God, My father was a wandering Aramaean, and he went down to Egypt, few in number, and lived there, and became a great nation, mighty and numerous. But the Egyptians mistreated us and afflicted us, putting us to hard labor. So we called out to the Lord, the God of our fathers, and the Lord heard our voice, and saw our affliction, toil, and oppression. Then the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, with great terror, signs, and wonders. And he brought us to this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And now, behold, I have brought the firstfruits of the land that you, O Lord, have given me. Then you are to place the basket before the Lord your God and bow down before him. So you shall rejoice, you, the Levite, and the foreigner dwelling among you, in all the good things the Lord your God has given you and your household. When you have finished laying aside a tenth of all your produce in the 3rd year, the year of the tithe, you are to give it to the Levite, the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow, that they may eat and be filled within your gates. Then you shall declare in the presence of the Lord your God, I have removed from my house the sacred portion, and have given it to the Levite, the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow, according to all the commandments you have given me. I have not transgressed or forgotten your commandments. I have not eaten any of the sacred portion while in mourning, or removed any of it while unclean, or offered any of it for the dead. I have obeyed the Lord my God. I have done everything you commanded me. Look down from your holy habitation from heaven, and bless your people Israel, and the land you have given us as you swore to our fathers, a land flowing with milk and honey. The Lord your God commands you this day to follow these statutes and ordinances. You must be careful to follow them with all your heart and with all your soul. Today you have proclaimed that the Lord is your God, and that you will walk in his ways, keep his statutes and commandments and ordinances, and listen to his voice. And today the Lord has proclaimed that you are his people and treasured possession as he promised, that you are to keep all his commandments, that he will set you high in praise and name and honor above all the nations he has made, and that you will be a holy people to the Lord your God, as he has promised. This is God's word. Yesterday I talked about Paul's use of Deuteronomy 25:4, and how Paul's use of it teaches us that God's word has ongoing relevance to every believer in any age, even if it doesn't directly apply to you or me. In other words, you don't have to own oxen to be obedient to Deuteronomy 25:4. As I mentioned yesterday, Paul saw the command in Deuteronomy 25:4, the command not to muzzle the ox, as a specific instance of a universal truth. And that truth is this: people who work should benefit from their labor. Specifically, Paul argued in 1 Timothy 5:18 and 1 Corinthians 9:9, that people who benefit from the ministry of apostles, evangelists, pastors, and so on, those people who benefit should provide financial support to those church leaders. Today in Deuteronomy 26, Moses commanded the people entering the promised land to bring 10%, a tithe according to verse 12, of what the land produced and dedicate that to the Lord. This initial tithe was a thank offering. They were to rehearse Israel's history from Abraham to the present day when they brought it. That's verses 5 through 10. It was an offering to God because it was called the sacred portion in verses 13 and 14. But although it was an offering to God, it was given for the benefit and blessing of specific people. Namely, It was given to the Levite, the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow, according to verse 13 in the NIV. The foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow were people who were unable to provide for themselves, so they needed to be provided for by others. This tithe was God's way of doing that. The Levites, on the other hand, did not have an allotted portion of land like every other tribe. Instead, they were scattered among the towns and villages of all the tribes in Israel in order to teach the law of God to all the people. They were allowed to own and farmed land, but their primary responsibility was to teach God's people His word and to minister at the tabernacle, later on the temple, during their assigned times. God commanded that the tithe would provide financial support to these ministers of His word so that they could serve the spiritual lives and needs of His people. There are no commands to tithe in the New Testament, and some believers are convinced that tithing is not for the New Testament age. In principle, I can agree with that. We are not under the law, so Moses' command to tithe does not have the same force as it did for the people of Israel. However, as we saw yesterday, all of God's word is written for us, even though it was not written directly to us. God's work still needs to be financially supported somehow. And the New Testament, like the aforementioned 1 Timothy 5:18 and 1 Corinthians 9:9, but also Galatians 6 and other passages, those passages command believers in the New Testament to give financially for God's work. The 10% rule is not commanded, but God's people are encouraged to give generously in order to store up treasure for themselves in heaven. Think about this. Do you think that Paul, who was raised in Judaism and taught as a Jew to give 10%, do you think that a man like that would think that a few $100 or 1% or 5% or anything less than 10% would qualify as giving generously? I don't think so. So God's word does not require anyone in this age to tithe, but it does command God's people to give, to provide for the poor and for the work of God's ministry, and to do so generously. Here in our church, our membership covenant requires tithing, so if you're a member here, you've agreed to tithe to our church, even if you don't think tithing is for Christians today. But beyond all of this, notice what Moses said would happen when God's people brought a tithe to the Levites and to the poor. Verse 11 in the NIV says, "Then you and the Levites and the foreigners residing among you shall rejoice in all the good things the Lord your God has given you and your household." Verse 12 says, "You shall give to the Levite, the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow, so that they may eat in your towns and be satisfied." These verses show the human benefit, the personal blessing that giving to God's work to the poor will bring. You will rejoice, verse 11 says, and so will the recipients, as verse 11 also says. They rejoice too, because they will eat in your towns and be satisfied. And so there's a personal benefit when people give generously. Do you tithe to our church? Or if you're a member of some other church and watching this or listening to it, do you tithe to your local church? If not, do you think the Lord is pleased by that decision? Or do you think the principles in this passage demand and call you to give generously to the Lord's work? Think about that today, and I'll see you tomorrow. May God bless you. Hope you have a great day today.